me a straight answer. And so I was able to kind of work through different mentorship roles. And I got a lot of mentees that I'm still really close with. And when I was about to graduate, they kind of, some of them were like, man, like, that's really, it's not, it's unfortunate that you're going to graduate and you'll be up in Dallas and I can't just stop you on campus and ask you about this certain thing or set up a meeting with you. And one of them was like, why don't you just write all your advice down? And so I was at first, kind of went in one ear and out the other. And then next thing I knew, I turned around and COVID hit. And much like many of y'all, had just graduated from college and I was stuck in my house all day, every day. And so figured, why not? So I started jotting down some stuff that I might be able to give advice on. And that turned into, 106 pages later, it turned into something that I thought was pretty useful. And so at the end there, why should you listen to me? This is not my advice that I kind of grabbed. And we'll talk a little bit later about who you should listen to as a mentor and who you shouldn't listen to. So why listen to me? I think for starters, it worked for me, right? So I'm here. There are a lot of people that get into medical school that maybe didn't have the best advice on this or the best advice on that. So kind of like I mentioned earlier, this is not just my advice. This is advice that I've gathered from others and kind of consolidated into what is the best advice in my opinion. So that's what you'll see throughout this. So first we're going to do a case study. So student 1 has a great GPA in MCAT. Take whatever you mean to be great in your head, but they didn't do a whole lot of extracurriculars at all. Student 2 has all sorts of extracurriculars. They started all sorts of organizations, things like that, but their MCAT and GPA leave something to be desired, let's say. Which of these two is most likely going to go to med school? So you guys can kind of think on that, take a second, and we can talk about that in just a second. All right, it's tough. I can't get a show of hands or anything here, but
don't worry. I'm tracking.
Okay. So do we have some responses in there, Ollie, or no?
Oh, yeah, we got a lot of responses.
Okay, what are people saying in general?
It's kind of split, but I will say the majority of people, like maybe 60%, will say student 1. But there's someone just said I'm torn. Yeah, a good amount of them are like on the fence, not knowing which one would be better.
Yeah, for sure. I was torn about this question for a long time because again, you go all over Reddit and you go all over Student Doctor Network and you'll see people say, maybe you don't actually need a good GPA in MCAT if you did all this extra cool stuff. Your GPA in MCAT, like all those things that you read online about good GPA in MCAT, they're not real. So that's what I remember reading a lot of, and I almost took comfort in it at first, and I said, "Oh, that's good. I don't need to make an A on all the tests and things like that." I am here to tell you unequivocally, regardless of what you read online, that's not true. So while neither of these students has an ideal application, right, I would be torn as well. But student 1 is definitely going to be the one that has a better chance. And so we're going to go on to the next slide and go a little farther into that. So here's some stuff. I just pulled this from AAMC. And so a couple things I want to point out is that you'll see between the matriculants and the applicants on the average GPA. So that's a hugely important number, right? So about a 0.15 difference between matriculants and applicants on GPA. 3.7 is, that's the average of people that got into medical school. And there's a pretty significant difference at every level between the students that got in and the students that didn't. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But another thing I want to mention is that 510 down there, so that came from the Princeton Review. That's the average MCAT for accepted students last year. So if you think about it, if you want to get into med school, you want about a 3.7 and about a 510. And I cannot tell you how important that is because it's so easy to take a step back and just find, confirmation bias for those of you who've taken psychology, right? Just find one person that tells you what you want to hear and you can lock onto that. And that's good in theory until you go to start applying to medical school and you realize I'm not getting any interviews, right? And so the other thing that I want to point out here over on the right is that between matriculants and applicants, I went ahead and did the math for y'all. There's about a 41% acceptance rate. And I know on top of that, from Baylor, at least, I looked at some data back when I was a student there. Only a touch over half of the students that start out as pre-meds when they're freshmen in college end up actually applying to medical school. So really, if you're a freshman and you're pre-med, that looks like about a 20% chance you get into medical school, is kind of what the numbers boil down to. And I've got really good news for you, is that it's not random, right? That's the best thing about applying to medical school, is it's not like you have a 20% chance of getting into medical school. What it means is you're going to be better than 80%, because you're going to do, you know, some of the stuff that follows and some other things like that. But the main takeaway from here, GPA and MCAT matter. They matter a lot. I know that, for just to give you some background on myself, I actually, when I took the MCAT, I crushed all my practice tests. I was really excited about it. And then I went in, and for whatever reason, I had an off day on the MCAT. I did about 7 or 8 points lower than what I was expecting to do. And even though the rest of my application, my GPA, everything was rock solid, I got one interview. And I strapped down, studied for the MCAT for about another 2 weeks, retook it. And the funny thing is, Southwestern, Dr. Fowler, you might be able to speak to this. Southwestern must have some sort of algorithm, because within 10 minutes of submitting my second MCAT score, I got an interview to Southwestern, to Baylor, all those places. So that just goes to show you, regardless of the rest of your application, that MCAT score especially is so important. All right.
Yeah,
So
Kyle, it has to be algorithmically driven, because we will get probably this year 6,000 applicants for 230 spots. And so, it's almost a shotgun approach. But we'll get into that more as far as when we get into interviews a little bit later. But yes, it has to be algorithmically driven.
Yeah. So yeah, that just goes to show you guys, it's because there are so many applicants. You guys saw on that last slide, there were something to the tune of 40,000 people that applied to medical school. And at a great med school like Southwestern, that finishes a lot of people, pretty good proportion of those people are applying to Southwestern. And so they can't review every single application very in depth. So what they have to do is they have to take your GPA and your MCAT and other quantitative metrics like that, and just say, this person doesn't make the cut. And maybe you started a bunch of organizations, maybe you spent time in Africa, but they'll never really get to see that because you didn't do all the MCAT. And so just all of that, not to scare you, but just to say it is as important as it sounds, even if somebody tries to tell you different. So here's something that I used to study. You can use it in high school, you can use it in college, and I call it the 9 to 5. So you guys heard, the average job is a 9 to 5. That's what everybody in the general population works, not so much physicians. But make school your job, because I know when I first got to Baylor, I was kind of like, I don't know how much to study. I don't know if I'm studying enough. How hard are these tests going to be? How do I get all this homework done? And then somebody gave me the advice to just make it like a job. And I went from staying up until 2, 3 in the morning, trying to finish my homework, trying to do things like that, to relaxing every day and having a good night's sleep every night. And the big difference is that I made school my job. And so the 9 to 5 essentially says that if you are between the hours of 9 and 5 every day, Monday through Friday, then you're going to be being productive. Whether that means you're studying, whether that means you are in class, things like that. Do that, and put your phone on do not disturb. That's the biggest thing, is that it's incredible to see somebody say, "Oh, I studied for 5 or 6 hours yesterday for this test and I still didn't do well." And while they're in the middle of telling me that during a tutoring session that I'm tutoring them in, they'll be checking their phone every 5 seconds during the tutoring session. I'm like, I think I know what might be wrong. So phones are the best and the worst thing to ever happen to us. Get very used to that do not disturb button. I did it in college and I do it now in med school. When I'm studying, I put it on do not disturb. And if I want to take a break and look at my phone, then I will. But I will not be, my life will not be dictated by the buzzing of my phone per se. And then studying with friends. It sounds good in theory, but I'm sure many of you guys have been in that situation where you guys all go to the library, everybody gets their coffee, you're ready to be productive. And then it ends up being 2 minutes of studying and 58 minutes of gossip, right? And you realize you didn't get anything done. And rather than that, if you don't have a good group of friends who's going to grind with you, then study by yourself, because at the end of the day, that's better than, if you gossip with those friends, you're either going to bomb the test. And we've just looked at those GPA numbers. You're either going to bomb the test, or you're going to catch yourself up until 3, 4 in the morning trying to cram for your exam. And I promise this 9 to 5, you're sitting there thinking, especially in high school and in college, you're sitting there saying that is a lot of boring time. But it's a lot better than it sounds, right? Because what's going to end up happening is that you have two options. You can either do that and, like I said, stay up into all hours of the night being miserable, or get up early, be productive all day, and then as soon as 5 o'clock hits, close your computer, and you'll find that you did everything you need to do for the day, and then you will be able to relax from 5 to 11, 5 to midnight. And the important thing about my college students out there, especially to my freshmen, everybody hates the 8 a.m. classes. A lot of people hate the 9 a.m. classes. Starting your day at noon sounds fantastic. Having that first class right at noon is great. But if you're going to have your first class at noon, the 9 to 5 rule still applies, right? So get up at 8, eat some breakfast, take a shower, and be in front of your computer studying by 9 o'clock. And I promise it will change your life. I know it definitely did mine. All right, so now we're going to get a little bit into kind of rethinking the med school admissions process. And so why is it that medical schools want you to, because you guys have all seen this, right? The GPA, the MCAT, the shadowing, the volunteering, the research. If I had to add one more, probably leadership, right? That's what's going to be on your application. And you guys have read those 5 things a million times. And so why is it that med schools want you to do that rather than, be extremely athletic per se? Thank God that's not the case. But the question that we're going to answer, I had never really asked this question until I actually got to be a senior, and I was talking with a faculty member about this, and we kind of came up with this. And so the cool thing about this is I didn't actually think about this. So unlike in college, where you guys can go ahead and transfer schools, or you can start back up, or you can go to school online, med school doesn't work that way. And so you've got students that are being accepted into medical school, and if they don't graduate, then that's just lost money. That's wasted money for the med school, right? And so I just found these numbers kind of online through the AMC again, and found that the median med school dropout rate is about 17%. So that's 1 in 6-ish students is going to drop out of medical school. And then the tuition for public schools, sorry if this number makes you cringe, $250,000 on average, and private schools $330,000. And so the median med school class, 140 students. I went ahead and did the math for you again. You're welcome. That's public schools losing about $6 million a year, and $8 million for private schools. And so what schools are looking at when they look at your GPA, right? So then you start to kind of take a step back and say, why do students drop out of medical school? One thing is they can't do it. They might not be dropping out on purpose. They might be flunking out. And so when they look at your GPA and MCAT, they're essentially looking at, what are the odds this person is going to be able to handle our curriculum? And that's why you see places like UT Southwestern, places like Baylor, those schools have higher average GPA requirements, not just for fun, but those are harder schools, right? So while you're here, you're probably doing a harder curriculum than elsewhere. And so they have to make sure that you're capable of doing that. So what you're doing
Kyle,
is not...
Kyle, let me butt in on that. That's absolutely true. And that this is one of the reasons we look at organic scores, because organic is hard. And so from an admissions committee perspective, Kyle, we don't want to bring somebody to the school that actually has a greater chance of flunking out, because from the standpoint of Texas, we're a Texas state school, we have to make doctors for the state of Texas. And so we don't want to take a chance that somebody might flunk out.
Yeah. And I'm sure this harks back to the 2 students that we talked about in the Q&A, right? It's Dr. Fowler said, you can have all of these great kind of aspirations. And, I worked in Africa for a long time because I'm passionate about medicine, and I want to go and start this huge free clinic somewhere in Texas. And in theory, Dr. Fowler looks at that and he says, oh, that's fantastic. But then he looks at your grades and he says, you're never going to get to that point. I can't trust that you'll be able to graduate. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about things like that. And then on top of that, why do they want you to do volunteering, leadership, things like that? In large part, that's to make sure, because a lot of people make good grades. So in large part, we're taking the same thing and we're saying, okay, med school is going to throw some extra things at you on top of just your classes. So can you do that other stuff and prove that you can still make good grades, right? So that's so important. And then the other things that med schools are considering is, are you going to make your classes experience better over 4 years, right? So many of you guys, if you go to a public university, there's, thousands and thousands and thousands of people that go to your school. And so you're not going to get to interact with everybody. UT Southwestern has a pretty large class size, and it's only about 230, right? A lot of schools, you just saw the average, there's 140 student class. You get to know each other very well. So med schools are also looking at, are you going to make their class, are you going to make somebody in their class miserable, right? Are you going to be the one causing problems? Or are you going to be the one, I had these really cool volunteering opportunities where I got a chance to really learn a lot about this certain population and things like that. Those are the kind of things that med school admissions committees are looking at. And they're not saying, oh, check, they did their volunteer hours. They're looking at that and they're saying, this person could contribute in the future, right? This person can make this class so much cooler and more diverse. And then will you match to a residency? So, right, a lot of the same things. I'm already working on my residency application, obviously, the same way freshmen and sophomores in college are already working on building their med school application. A lot of the same stuff, leadership, volunteering, stuff like that, that is also going to go into the residency application. So if you just work your way backwards, when you guys do your interviews, and for those of you who have already had some interviews, they're gonna tout that number of, we had this many people matched to orthopedics, 99% of our students matched to a residency last year. They want to make sure you're going to contribute to that number, right? They don't want you to go through, even if you get through all 4 years of med school, they don't want you to get through all 4 years and then be somebody on the side of the street that's got a MD. So those are some things to consider, and we're going to talk about what that actually means. So this is going to keep all of that I just talked about kind of in the back of your mind as we go into this part. So med school admissions committees are in large part going to be making decisions on interviews based on two factors. And so do you have the scores to show you can handle medical school, right? So that's what we've been talking about time in and time out. It's so important. So can you even handle it? If you can't handle it, they don't really care about the rest of the stuff. And then do you check the extracurricular boxes? Is there some overwhelmingly weird part of your application that you just didn't do for whatever reason? That's kind of a red flag. And so a lot of people, everybody wants the numbers. Trust me, I understand. I wanted the numbers too. My general rule was that for volunteering and shadowing, my goal for all of undergrad was to get about 100 hours of each. Like I said, some people have upwards of 1,000. Most of my peers in undergrad, 100 was the number for us. Okay. So now you got an interview based on those two things. Okay. So keep in mind, none of that stuff had anything to do with what kind of extracurriculars you had, things like that. But then you jump into the interview, and a lot of medical schools are essentially your MCAT and GPA kind of go out the window. You've already been screened for a lot of that stuff. So it plays a much lower, it's weighted a lot lower than at the beginning of this. So when you go to interview, then you're going to be talking about your extracurriculars. And this is why it's so important. The last slide was not just kind of something interesting. The last slide was so important because this actually caters how you're answering questions, right? So when you interview with somebody and they ask about your shadowing experiences, they don't care about how much medicine you know. You're going to learn medicine there. I've seen so many people jump into their med school interviews and they are trying to tout how much they learned on this shadowing opportunity. Shadowing opportunities, when you kind of go back and look, what's another reason people drop out of med school? They find out they don't like medicine as much as they thought they did. So your shadowing is there for the main purpose of you saying, I know the good and the bad of medicine. I've experienced as much as I can just so I can get a better understanding of what I'm jumping into. And I still want to do it because medicine is not the perfect job. There are no perfect jobs out there. So there are some kind of dark underbellies, as a lot of people say. And so the question becomes, when you're answering questions about this shadowing opportunity, it's not a bad thing to say, one thing that actually kind of frustrated me when I was on the shadowing opportunity, like one thing I noticed that I didn't like was this. And I know that's not in all of medicine, but I kind of noticed that. So they want to see that you're getting a full understanding of what it means to go into medicine and that you still want to do it rather than, I already know how to do orthopedic surgery as an incoming MS1. That's not so much what they're looking for. So use what I just talked about and kind of ask yourself, okay, why are medical schools asking me this? And that will cater how you use it on your application that will cater how you talk about it in interviews, all of that stuff. And then how much did you enjoy your extracurriculars? I cannot tell you, having been somebody that has interviewed somebody, not for medical school, but for all sorts of other things, a lot of your interview is going to be me looking at your resume and saying, oh, tell me more about this experience. And that's in part to make sure you really did it. But also, they don't want to have you sit there and say, oh, you know, I did this and that and the other while I was doing that. That is so boring. They want you to sit there. Everything that's on your resume, you should be able to sit there and say, oh, let me tell you about this. Like, this is the coolest thing ever. That's how you crush an interview, is be excited about the things that you did. Don't make yourself seem like you did something because you thought you had to. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So what extracurriculars should you do? This is the most popular question I got when I was advising students in undergrad. People would text me or people would FaceTime me. All right, sit down and have a meeting with somebody, and they say, I just got offered this opportunity and I'm not sure if I should do it or not, blah, blah, blah. And they're always like, should I do it or should I not do it? Should I drop this thing? Should I stay in it? And this is how I kind of formed this piece of advice, because I always told them, I don't know for your specific situation. I have no idea what you should do because I don't know anything about you. So this is kind of a three-pronged approach that in my book, I term the most important pre-med advice, because I really do think it is the most important pre-med advice. You're looking at how much will it help your application, right? That's the big one that we all know already. Is this thing going to help my application or not? How much time will it take up? And how much will you enjoy it? Okay. And the main point that I want to get across is that numbers 2 and 3 are equally as important as number 1. It's so important that numbers 2 and 3 become true in some of that stuff. And not everything you do, probably nothing you do, will meet all 3 of these to the highest standard. And so what you should really be looking at is, there's this one thing that I really, really enjoy doing. It may not help my application that much, but I've already did a bunch of number 1 things. So let me do a number 3 thing. And so that's kind of, hearkening back to what I talked about myself earlier. I picked up a philosophy minor in large part because I think philosophy is super cool. I still do, right? And I also started writing, obviously, right? And that was something that went on my application, is that, I've been doing a lot of writing recently. And neither of those things I anticipated would help my application at all. But those 2 things ended up being some of the things I talked about most during my interviews. Is they were just like, okay, so this is interesting. You picked up a philosophy minor. Why is that? And I was able to sit there and say, oh, here's this cool stuff that I learned in philosophy. And hearkening back to what we talked about with how much will you contribute to your med school class? What makes you different? What makes you cool? And so you have to be prepared to talk about every single thing you do on your application during an interview. And so if that stuff doesn't make you excited, if you did a volunteer opportunity for 3 years every week, just so you could get the hours, and then they ask you about it and you're like, it comes across that you didn't like it that much, those hours became null essentially during that interview. What they want to talk to you about is stuff that makes you excited. And like I said, they do not want to talk to somebody who did all of this extra stuff because they thought they had to. And so this is kind of this phrase that I kind of coined. Are you standing out or are you burning out? Because if you do everything you do because of number 1, you're not going to stand out and you are going to burn out. Okay. And so if you can go ahead and take on all of this different stuff and say, this won't take up too much time and I really like it, even if it's not going to help my application that much, I'm going to do it anyways, because this is something that I think is cool. Med schools are looking for people, not robots. And that should be a relief. I know some of you guys are thinking, well, shoot, like, I don't know what to do, because I thought I just had to do all of these. I thought it was a numbers game. And like we talked about in the past, it is a little bit of a numbers game, but in large part, they want something that you're going to enjoy talking about. And on top of that, if you do everything because of number 1, you will burn out. So this should be relieving advice to y'all. Do what you enjoy doing. All right, so we kind of talked about this already. How do you talk about your extracurriculars? So like we talked about with shadowing, do you actually know what being a doctor's like? Or did you decide you wanted to be a doctor after watching Grey's Anatomy, and then you jump into the first semester of med school and you're like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And then you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then you drop out, right? Like we talked about, that's what contributes to some of that $6 million a year the schools are losing. Volunteering, do you enjoy serving others? And then research, do you enjoy the basic sciences? There's a very unfortunate fact that I have to tell you guys, and that's that the Krebs cycle never disappears. I thought that I had beaten the Krebs cycle, and things like that, oxidative phosphorylation, and we started jumping into my endocrine block right now, which involves a lot of diabetes. And so because we're learning about diabetes, we're learning about glucose, and you guys know what happens. You guys know what happens when you start learning about glucose. And so it never goes away. And so are you going to get to med school thinking this is the end of science, and then learn that you still have to learn science for the rest of your life and drop out? That's one thing that med schools are looking out for. And then leadership. Do you know what it means to be a leader? And do you know how to do all the things that come with being a leader? So can you handle conflict? The thing about being at Southwestern, much like a lot of other places, is so many people are that type A personality, as I'm sure a ton of y'all are, right? That's just kind of pre-meds are catered towards being the type A because we love the challenge. We love how long it takes. We love how hard it is. And so you have to learn, you're not going to get to Southwestern and just try and, type A everybody and big dog everybody. And so have you learned in undergrad that that's not going to work? And med schools admissions committees can see that from the way you write your essays. And so, like I said, as you're writing your essays, as you're answering interview questions, as you're filling out your application, think about, why are they asking me this? I'm sure they're asking me this because they want to know, how am I going to contribute to their class? Am I going to burn out? Things like that. And will I match to a good residency? And then cater your answer towards that. This is not just philosophical. This is practical information here, okay? All right, now here's some super practical information. Please, please, please make a journal. Even if you are, unless you've already applied to medical school, anybody else, as soon as you guys start college, or even if you're in high school, you can start it now. As soon as you guys start college, or if you're a sophomore or junior, go back and start this now. It will make your life so easy because so many people didn't understand. They would do all these shadowing hours, do all these volunteering hours, and then their application would pop up and they'd be like, okay, how many days were you there? And what dates were they? What doctor were you with? What did you learn during that experience? And how did that impact you? And you're going to be like, I can't even remember the doctor's name. I don't even remember. Was that in Texas? Was that in Washington? I don't remember. And so you're going to run into this problem of you did it, but you don't actually know when you did it, how it made you feel. And so you should have a journal, and it can be virtual or it can be paper. I did a paper journal. I've since switched over to virtual, and I'll show you guys what that looks like in a second. But write everything down. And on this next slide, if you guys want to screenshot the next slide or whatever you want to do, I'll be talking about, I kind of have some information on what to include for each of these. And this is not just my personal opinion. This is what comes directly from the TMD-SAS or the MCAT application, the med school application. This is what they ask about for these different things. So the only other thing I want to mention on here is be thorough. It may seem like as you're doing something, just like I'm sure you guys do this all the time. I know I do this all the time. Somebody says something to me and I go, I'm not going to write that down or anything or set an alarm because I'll remember that for sure. I'll remember to do that. And you never do. And so the same thing is true here. You might be like, oh, I will never forget that interaction that I had. And then 2.5 years later, you forgot. And so don't waste any shadowing opportunities. Don't waste the things that are going to turn you into a better doctor. Make sure you write those down so that when you're asked about them on applications, you can communicate them. All right, so yeah, this is kind of this thing. I don't have much to say on all of this, but these are the things that are going to be on the med school applications. And so if you guys want to write these down, I can give you a second for that really quick. Take a screenshot, take a picture on your phone, whatever it may be. And these are going to be kind of the things that I would recommend writing down. And if you don't get them all, then that's okay too. We can come back to it later if need be. Okay, so yeah, real quick, this is what mine looks like. So I switched over to something called Notion. You guys can see up in the web address how that's spelled. It's free and it's super awesome. It takes some time to get to learn how to do it, but you can see over on the left, I have my shadowing, my volunteering, research, leadership, the clubs I was in, and am in. So this is all for med school. So this is just, I took a screenshot of the top of my shadowing tab. And so you can see it talked about who I was with, for how long I was with, where I was at, the specialty I shadowed, and some things that I liked and didn't like about the ER when I went on those specific trips. And so Dr. Fowler, I've yet to make my tab for last night, but I'm sure I'll talk about all the terrible things that happened while I was shadowing you. But yeah, so you utilize this. I love the online version because you can't lose an online version. But in undergrad, I did use a paper version. All right, Q&A time. So yeah, like it says, yeah.
All right, so we got ourselves a lot of questions, but we'll try to ask as many as we can. First one, I feel like a lot of people might be going through the same thing as this person. I am a junior and have no extracurricular clinical shadowing volunteer experience due to COVID. Should I focus on getting those hours or focus on a good MCAT score?
Man, that's a great question. First of all, we are living in very weird times. Dr. Fowler may be able to speak to this a little bit better than I can, but I would say that kind of like we talked about at the beginning, if you go and volunteer your butt off and shadow your butt off for 10 hours a day for the next however many weeks, and then you bomb the MCAT, all of that shadowing and everything is completely useless. On the flip side, you do want to come close to checking those boxes. So it's kind of, a double-edged sword when it comes to that. But I think med schools are going to be a lot more catering towards and accommodating towards students who struggled to find those hours because of COVID, rather than students who bombed the MCAT but managed to find those hours somehow.
Yeah, Kyle, I would add to that. Med schools are looking for a well-rounded person. For example, I remember an application I saw several years ago that a very intelligent young person wrote in, had really great grades, and it said for leisure activity, none. And you say, is this a person who lives in the library and is doing absolutely nothing but studying? This person was not really, at least could not express on paper that the person was a well-rounded person. What I would say is that keep in mind that we're talking about all of your activities with your church, with your family, things that you may be doing. And so these extracurricular activities may be things that you really haven't thought about on the front end. Kyle.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. I know, like I said, I didn't have anywhere to write. The fact that I love to be a writer, that wasn't something that I put, and I love to play golf. I ran a couple half marathons whenever I was an undergrad. Those all went on my application under leisure activities. So like we talked about, med schools are looking for somebody that's going to contribute to their class is a huge thing. So part of a decent part of your application is just going to be, what do you do for fun? How are you going to contribute to our class that makes you different from everybody else? And so you probably have, I think, to speak to Dr. Fowler's point, you probably have more going on your application than you even think you do. Ali?
Yeah. I know when I was doing my application, yeah, those leisure activities make you go back and think, okay, what have I done? Oh yeah, I can add this, this, and that. So yeah, that's great. Another question. So what kind of struggles did you go through before applying to med school, and how did you resolve them?
Yeah, like I said, the main one that pops into my head that was really at the time, it felt like it was the end of the world, was when I got that first MCAT score back. As somebody who had taken all my time to study and put into practice all of this med school advice, and I'm about to talk to you guys about the MCAT quite a bit. And so I learned the best ways to do it. I put them into practice. Everything was going well. The practice test scores were exactly where I wanted them to be. And then it came back and it just didn't happen. And it's one of those things that was one of the biggest struggles ever. And there were tears shed. There were moms called. And at the end of the day, I went and talked to my pre-med advisor, and he was like, dude, relax. It's okay. You can study for it. You can take it again. He said something that has stuck with me to this day. If you deserve to get into medical school, you will get into medical school. If you've got the numbers, if you've got the application, if you did what you're supposed to do, you'll learn a whole bunch of stuff about the timing of it and making sure you write your stuff in the perfect way. These are fringe things. These are things that will help, but they're fringe things. If you've taken care of business and you've shown that you want to be a doctor and you love medicine and you've studied hard in your classes, if you deserve to get into medical school, you will get into medical school. So he basically told me that. He said, go take it again. Yes, you'll be applying late. Yes, all these things that you've read on Student Doctor Network are going to end your life. they're not going to. And so take a step back, and in those kind of tough situations, that would be the main one. I think another one is that, and this is probably good advice because of all of you type A personalities, this is why I say leadership is so important. When I was a sophomore, I started to place my resume above my friends. In large part, I had a lot of pre-med friends, and it became a battle, right? It became who's better, who's going to get this spot, who's not going to get the spot. And that is something I would say don't do it. There are so many resume building activities out there. And luckily, I made amends with a lot of those people, and there were multiple people at fault, but I was not the same person that I was back then that I am now. And that is a good thing, because I would say that was one thing, is I got too invested in point number one. So what we were talking about is how much will this help my application? And I realized, number one, I was miserable. And number two, a lot of the people around me were miserable towards me. And so that's another thing that I had to struggle with and kind of learn the hard way.
Yeah. So there's a lot of non-traditional applicants that are here today. So I feel like it's important for us to ask this question. How do medical schools consider non-traditional students, in the sense that you may work full-time or you do school full-time and may not be able to do as many extracurriculars as you'd like?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, on one side of things, go back to that piece of advice that I gave about why are med schools wondering these things, right? And so med schools are in large part wondering, can you handle the classes and handle other things? And so they would look at you as somebody that worked. Like I said, two of my best friends, one of them was in the military for 10 years, and one of them worked as an engineer in California. What they did was they studied hard for the MCAT, and they showed that they can make the grades. And then they were like, I wasn't planning on being a pre-med, right? So here I am. Here's the reason. You still have to prove. You have to prove those things that we talked about. You have to prove I can contribute, which you've already done, right, by being non-traditional and all the cool stuff you've done. I'm sure you've got awesome backstories. You've already proven that factor, that I'm going to give something to this class that all of those 4-year people, something that I can't get, right? As somebody who went to college for 4 years, studied my butt off, checked the boxes, and showed up in med school. Those people, that guy that served he served overseas and stuff like that, he contributes something to our class that I never could. And so you've already proven that, but you still have to prove the other two things. You have to prove, yes, I know what it's like to be a doctor, and I still want to do it. And so whatever form that takes, you have to prove that to them. And number two, you have to prove that, yes, I can make the grades. So the fact that you're an engineer doesn't tell me that you can excel in the sciences. The MCAT tells me that you can excel in the sciences. And, to that point with non-traditional applicants, because my friend who's an engineer went to Berkeley, and he was an engineer major, his GPA was not ideal, because who would make a 4.0 as an engineering student at Berkeley? And so that's one of those things that he took a step back, and he said, he talked about this in his application. He said, my GPA is not great, but I know what he understood what I'm talking to y'all about. He understood they want to know, can I do well here? And so I'm going to tell them, I know my GPA is not as good as a lot of the other students, but that's because of this reason. And now look, I crushed the MCAT. That tells you all you need to know. Is essentially the advice I'd give on
Yeah. I feel like that's really important for a lot of non-traditionals, and a lot of people that are traditionals that are kind of worried about their GPA and whatever, to, it's not the end of the world. You still got this.
Yep.
So I know we haven't really talked about it that much, but there's been a lot of questions about research and research activities. So some people have asked, how do you get into research when you're not in the most research-focused schools? And how do you show on your application that you care both about science and medicine without being too overtly just talking about research?
Yeah, right. If all you want to do is, I have heard this a million times. If all I want to do is research, I would be a PhD, right? A physician's whole life is not basic science research. I can promise you that.
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, I think I proved my love for the basic sciences and my mastery of the basic sciences in large part by tutoring, right? I was a tutor for intro to chem, for OChem, things like that. I showed my mastery and my, outside of being forced to study it for the grade, I showed that I actually wanted to go back and learn that stuff. and so I could teach it to others. And so there's that. And then I personally did not do any basic science research. I never worked in a lab and pipetted things. It wasn't my thing, so I didn't do it. And that's one of those things, like I was talking about. Yes, it would have helped my application, but I despised it so much. And this isn't everybody, right? But I despised working in a lab and pipetting petri dishes so much that I said I just can't do it. And I think that's in large part one of those things that helped me stay away from burnout. And there's so many research opportunities out there. You can show that you love medicine and love the sciences by doing a little more transitional research, something like that. There is stuff that goes on at your school. I can promise you that. And if not, there are opportunities online. And if not, one piece of advice I always give, whether it be volunteering, leadership, shadowing, one thing a med school loves more than anything else is when you say, I couldn't find anything that was really perfect for me, so I kind of created my own. I know so many students that have done that, and that's essentially all they talk about in med school is kind of the organization or the project that they just designed from scratch because they had an idea. And so that's what I would say to that is that there is research that may not be, and you can talk to that, right? You say, my school didn't have a whole lot of research, but I'm interested in research is something that I think would be cool in the future. And so I kind of did, whether it be, a social sciences research, and just kind of, I wanted to learn something about something. Med schools, it's different, right? It's something that'll make you stand out.
I love how you said that you haven't ever used a pipette, and I just came back from Southwestern researching in my lab where I was basically pipetting the entire day. So yeah, it just shows how different applications can be. All right, I'm going to ask two more. Yeah.
Let me speak a little bit more to that.
Go ahead.
I will say that different med schools like different things. So there are certain schools that are very research focused. And a way you can look at that is look at their mission statement. Look at the things that they value on their website, and you'll get a feel for that. And that's one of those things. There are med schools that I did not get into, and it was in large part because my missions didn't really match their missions. Just because you don't get into a med school doesn't mean you're not good enough to go to that medical school, right? If you are really you're like, research isn't for me, that will come out on your application. And research heavy schools that are going to expect you to do a lot of research might not give you an interview, or they might not accept you if you're not excited about research. And that is not a bad thing. That's a blessing, right? You don't want to spend 4 years at a school that's going to force you into research if you don't like research. So I would say to that end is that whatever med school you get into and whatever med schools you're applying to, it'll be schools that match kind of your personal mission statement. And another thing to consider is that's how you want to look at it on your secondaries. When I was doing my UT Southwestern secondary application, that looked a lot different than my secondary applications that I was writing to UT San Antonio, because those schools are different, right?
All right, I'm going to ask one, if we have time, 2 more questions, and then we'll just continue on with the rest of the presentation. All right?
Yeah.
So here's a question that we got about taking years off. So one question I have is, do you feel like you should have taken a year off before going to med school? I know many who regret going straight in, and I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. And so I'm gonna speak a lot to that later. I actually have a slide that's almost exclusively dedicated to that.
Right.
The short answer that I'll get into more later is that I personally didn't need one, but I have given advice to people and told them to take one. So that's kind of the brief answer that I'll talk a little bit more about later.
All right. That's a good segue to the rest of the presentation. So go ahead, carry on.
All right. Good questions, guys. All right. This is going to be in large part MCAT and interview stuff. So I know for you freshmen, you should not be stressed about the MCAT yet. Please don't be, but we're going to speak a little bit to just kind of general MCAT strategy. So we've got student 1 who read an MCAT prep book. So they got the Kaplan books or the Princeton Review books, and they read and they studied them all day for 2 months. They took 3 practice tests every week leading up to their test, studied what they missed on those practice tests, and then took the real deal. Student 2, they studied the MCAT prep books for maybe 2 weeks or so. They took 9 practice tests leading up to their exam, and then they were studying exclusively and mostly what they missed. Which of those students is going to score better on the real deal? This one ought to be interesting. I'll be interested to see what their responses are.
Yeah. Just give you guys 5 more seconds. It's honestly pretty split, but in the beginning, there was a lot of people that were saying student one, and one person saying it depends on the student's prior knowledge. I guess I think that's important. I feel like how they're answering it is the way that these guys are studying as well. Like some people would more align to student one, and some people would have more aligned to student two. So, what do you think? Because I'm thinking student one, but it really depends on who the person is, who the test taker is.
Yeah, definitely. I could totally see that. You say, I don't have I don't have a great science background, things like that. And this speaks I would say, I'm going to limit this to, let's say this student was a science major in college, because I don't know if this totally applies to somebody who has absolutely no science background. They got their degree in music and they haven't ever hardly done anything science related. They don't want to start taking practice tests immediately, but I would say any of you that graduated with a biology degree or you're studying biology, you want to be student two. I can promise you that. And so we're going to look at that a little bit more. If you don't believe me, here's a pretty, so practice. So you'll read a lot of different stuff about how many practice MCATs should you take, how often should you take them, should you take the whole thing, or like just take cars one day and the next day take biochem. I'm going to tell you something that is probably not the most overwhelmingly fun piece of information to hear, but it's, I think, the best advice. And again, this is not me speaking, this is me, my personal advice. Plus, I talked to a lot of students who did do well on the MCAT. I talked to a lot of people who did not do well on the MCAT, talked to them about their study strategies as I was creating this book. And so this comes from a very large crowdsourced piece of information. What you want to do is, after you've done some very baseline studying, reviewing some of that stuff you don't remember from Chem 1, that's heavy on the MCAT, start your practice tests. And the first couple practice tests, you will tank them. And that's okay. That is perfectly okay. The good news is the practice test is not going to, med schools will never see any of your practice test scores. And so to the section by section thing, I think that is a terrible idea. I think people only say it's a good idea because they're lazy. At the end of the day, you can't run 2 miles every day in preparation for a marathon. You have, one of the huge parts about taking a 7.5-hour test, which none of y'all will have done to that point, is that you have to train your brain to be functional for 7.5 hours. I can't tell you the number of people I talked to that they were like, man, I bombed the psych-soc section. And the psych-soc section is probably the easiest one. And the reason is because the psych-soc section is the last. That is the key there, is because their brain was so cashed out by the time they finished up, because they hadn't taken they'd maybe taken 1, maybe 2 full practice tests. Your brain doesn't get used to focusing for that long if you don't make it. And so my personal MCAT study strategy was I studied for a couple weeks, and then I started taking practice tests, and I took one every week. I got up early, showered, started it just like the real deal, started it by 8 a.m. And it was on Saturdays. If you can manage to get a free day in the middle of the week during your MCAT semester, even better. Mine had to be on Saturdays. Started at 8 a.m., go straight, use the 10, 15-minute breaks that the real test gives you, and do the real deal. And so I did mine once a week leading up to the test. And then which one should you use? I'm sure y'all will read this a lot. This is a pretty popular opinion. AAMC resources are a must. They have 4 practice tests. They have question banks. That's the real deal. Save them till you're towards the end. I can't speak much more to that than what most of y'all already know. But use those. And then how do you review them? So I go through I would take practice tests on Saturday. Sunday was off. Sunday was football's day. Sunday was God's day. The Sunday was your day, whatever you needed it to be. But you need to relax a little bit. And then Monday, the first thing I would do is I would go through and I would review every question from all the sections, questions I got right and questions I got wrong. If there was anything I didn't quite understand, any phrases they used that didn't make sense to me, then I would search them and I would make a note of them. And then my goal for the week was to go through and study that specific stuff. Was say, okay, I now understand these things. And that was kind of the goal for the week. And I always had enough stuff. And if I ended up studying all that stuff and feeling good about it, then the next thing would be, I would just kind of study some extra stuff that I heard was important, or I know that's important that I don't know well enough. The key here is that MCAT practice tests are really good at testing you more or less on what's going to be on the real deal. Because what you're going to see is if you just study those MCAT prep books, number one, you're going to be miserable because they're so long and they're so terrible. Number two is that a lot of that stuff is what we call like low yield stuff, right? And the MCAT books don't do a great job of telling you this is super important. Like I can't tell you, like every single test you'll take will have 5 questions about amino acids and the properties of amino acids, things like that. I took like 10 practice tests and 2 real MCATs, never had a question about NMR. But if all you're doing is studying the test books, then you're going to sit there and you're going to spend half a day learning about NMR because it's in the book, so I have to learn it. And so this is so important because I think the main reason that you need to be taking practice tests is because you'll start to see a pattern. Once you take about 6 or 7 practice tests, you'll start to pick up a pattern of, okay, every time I've taken a test, there's been a question that's kind of about this topic. I need to make sure I know this one really, really well. And then you'll see the tangential question every once in a while, and you'll be like, I'll study that a little bit. But and then you'll see that there's a lot of stuff that's in those books that you'll never see again. You'll never see them on a real test. And so take practice tests, even if you do bad, and learn from those practice tests. Each section to the MCAT is very different. I'm going to talk next slide about my kind of personal philosophy on a daily test strategy. But each section is super different, so no study method works for every section. I will say that in my book that I wrote, I have a chapter dedicated to each of the individual MCAT sections and how to, number one, take those tests and how I scored as well as I did on the MCAT, and then also how I studied for those individual sections. It's data backed and things like that. And the last thing is don't be overwhelmed. Because I know when you first start studying for the MCAT, or if you're restudying for the MCAT or you're halfway through, you'll look at how much you have left to study and you'll start seeing how many pages could I possibly look at today? And you'll get to the end of the day and you realize I didn't actually learn anything. I just sat there and flipped through stuff because it made me feel better about myself and I managed to get a lot done. You will be so much better off if you just take a deep breath and really focus in on, I'm going to make sure I learn something every single day. Because 3+ months is a long time to study. That's what I recommend. That is so much time. So learn something every single day. Don't try and learn everything in one day. Just learn something every day, and your score will keep improving. So here's some of this that I wanted to talk on. So this is I think the end value for this was 170. I don't have there's not a whole lot backing. This is not my data. Not a whole lot backing kind of the study methods of this, but I think this is just kind of a visual to help you out with the advice that I'm trying to give. There's a couple things I want you to notice, and that's one, 9 or 10 seems to be the limit, right? People that are taking, what's behind that is 10+, and you can actually see a lot of these numbers as you go from kind of the 9 or 10 column over to the right. A lot of them are actually dropping, and that's because students that study for 5+ months for the MCAT, they will burn themselves out, because studying for the MCAT should be something that you do hard, do it fast, and then get it over with. So if you're studying for 5 months for the MCAT, your brain will reach a threshold, and all you'll do is start to burn yourself out. But this 9 or 10 number, I think one of the things that jumps out at me is that even students that were scoring below the median score for the MCAT on Kaplan, if they took 9 or 10 of them, then on the real thing, they averaged a 515. That was their average for students who were averaging a 495 to 497 on the Kaplan practice test if they took 9 or 10. And that's up from a 502 for students that only took 1 or 2. And so that's kind of the whole point of this, is just to show you how important that is to take that 9 or 10 practice test. And then if you are in the middle of your MCAT studying and you're like, shoot, I haven't been doing that, that's okay. This is in a perfect world. That's not to say that your study method can't work, but I would say if you haven't been taking practice tests, start as soon as you can. And then here let's do some math. So 9 or 10 practice tests. We're going to work our way backwards from that and talk about when you should take the MCAT. So I personally have a philosophy. I know the 2 main times that people say, and this is for my non-gap year people, and this is for my traditional students, but during your junior year, most students will either take it during Christmas break or they'll take it sometime in the spring. And so I can speak to this briefly because I know we've got a bunch of non-traditional students that'll probably tune out for this one. But during Christmas break, I don't think is the best idea, because in large part, you're going to end up wasting your whole fall semester. Number one, you take biochem during the fall of your junior year, most likely. you need to have a good biochem foundation before you start studying for the MCAT, or else it's just impossible, because regardless of what you read online, again, and biochem is the most important subject for the MCAT. It permeates so much of the science sections. You just need to know it. And so I wouldn't start studying for the MCAT until you've gotten your biochem down. And so that's one main reason. The other reason is that I recommend that you want to toss most of your extracurriculars during your MCAT semester. So kind of like that question we heard earlier, what's more important, the extracurricular stuff or the MCAT score? And my answer was the MCAT score in large part. And that's kind of because of all the things we talked about at the beginning of this talk. And so you want to toss most of your extracurriculars during that semester that you're studying for the MCAT, because I know tons of students who had really good resumes, but they were the president of 5 different things during their MCAT semester. And even though they only took 12 hours, they were like, man, I can't start studying for the MCAT until 9 p.m. every night. And then they don't do well on the MCAT. I can think of 2 specific situations. They don't do well on the MCAT and they don't get into medical school. And that's not me saying hypothetically. That happened to 2 people I know, one that applied last year and one that applied 3 years ago. And so I would recommend taking it in the spring, because if you take it in the fall or a Christmas break, you have to offload your extracurriculars a semester earlier. And so that's a whole semester that you're not boosting the extracurricular part of your application, if that makes sense. And then I'd recommend with 9 to 10 practice tests, like I said, kind of 2 weeks of just prep studying, and then take a test every week leading up to it. 9 plus 2 weeks of study is 11 weeks, plus the week off the week before the test. That gives you about 12 weeks, so about 3 months. So if you're going to look at applications opening in early May, I think I was looking on the AAMC website earlier today, and it said like May 3rd is when applications will open typically, and then you can submit them in mid-May. And so you want to have the MCAT done by then, and you want to keep in mind that the MCAT scores take about a month to get back. And so you want to be able to sit there and say, okay, work my way backwards. I probably need to take it mid to early April, and then work your way backwards from there 3 months. Start around when your spring semester starts, or start in January. For my non-traditional students, you can take it whenever you feel comfortable to take it. But my main recommendation would be get the practice tests in, even though they're miserable, even though they're terrible. I totally get it. Mine was during basketball season, during that season when Baylor was crushing it. It was awful. Every Saturday, I couldn't watch Baylor because I had to take my MCAT practice test. I totally get it, but make yourself do it. Take enough to where you feel comfortable, hopefully to that 8 or 9 area at least, and then take it. But don't study for 5 months. Like I said, you'll just burn yourself out, and you won't want to retake it if you do poorly. So yeah, here's my first typical day of MCAT studying. Here's some more practical resources for y'all. I would wake up in the morning, and I'd start out with my flashcards. So I use Anki, love Anki. Quizlet's very similar. If any of you guys are familiar with Pre-Med 95, he is a godsend who made Anki decks out of the Khan Academy Psych Soc information. So it's all the phrases. So Psych Soc is almost exclusively, and I talk a lot more about this in my book, like I said. So if you're more interested in any of this stuff, feel free to go over that way towards the end of this talk. But Pre-Med 95 took the Khan Academy Psych Soc information, because Psych Soc is all terminology. If you know all the terminology, you will do well on the test. I studied exclusively the Khan Academy information, and I did well on Psych Soc. And I know that was true for pretty much all of my peers too. That's me and everybody I knew. That's what we studied. And so Pre-Med 95 turned it into an Anki deck. There's also a Quizlet deck made off of that Anki deck. And I would get an idea of how many cards you need to do per day to get done with all the cards by the end of your study time. And that's the first thing I would do, because it's concrete. You can say, okay, I did my 20 cards for the day, on to the next thing. And then cards should be next. Get yourself a cards book, any of them. I loved the Exam Cracker one. I thought it was great. But get yourself a cards book, and as soon as you finish your flashcards, do 3 cards passages a day. When you do your 3 cards passages, one thing y'all probably know about the MCAT is that you have an equivalent. It's over the course of a lot of blocks, but you get, I think, an hour and a half for 9 blocks. So if we do the math on that, 9 passages on the card section. If you do the math on that, you have 10 minutes per passage. The huge mistake students make is that they will, if they get stuck on a question, they will sit on that question for 10 minutes. And then there are easier questions towards the end that they're going to miss because they're trying to fly through it. Can't fly through cars. It's better to take the L on that question and just keep going. And so I would say you want to get an internal clock of what 10 minutes looks like in your head. And so go to cars, do the passages. And when you do the passages, set a 10-minute timer. for each individual passage. Don't think of it as 90 minutes to do 9 passages. Think of it as 10 minutes to do a passage, and just do that over and over and over again. And you'll get a really good internal clock of how much time you have left. And then once you finish that stuff, you did your flashcards, you did your cars passages. That's kind of the concrete stuff that you wanted to knock out. Study your sciences. So let's go to the practice test and study the concepts, whether it be, I didn't understand this concept very well. So many good resources, things like that. If you can't remember the different amino acids, then you want to go in and just have a flashcard deck for it. Find a flashcard deck online and say, today I'm learning the amino acids, so I'm never going to miss them again. And do that every single day. And I promise your score will start to go up using this method. So how much should you study? I won't spend very much time on this one, but I know you guys are going to ask it. I'm sure it's in the chat. How much do I need to study for the MCAT? Give me an hour number. I was looking for the same thing. When I started looking at studying for the MCAT, I was like, give me an hour number that I can count my way up to, that if I reach that number, I'll be set. And everybody says that there is no good number, because it's true. There is no good number. Give yourself a goal score and take practice tests until you feel like you can reach that goal score. It's as simple as that. If you want to get a 520, then say, I'm going to take practice tests until I feel like I can get a 520. And shoot for the stars. Don't say, man, if I could just get a 505. Shoot for the stars, and we'll see where it goes from there. But a lot of people say 500 hours. I did some math on that over the course of 3 months. If you do it 6 hours a day, that's 6.5 hours a day. Or 5 hours a day, that's 6.5 hours a day. That sucks. That's miserable. That's way too many hours a day to study for the MCAT. 300 hours, a little more reasonable, but still 4 hours a day is quite a bit. But yeah, so focus more so on a number rather than like a number of hours. Focus more so on a score than a number. And then I would say, as you guys that are sophomores, juniors planning your MCAT semester, you want to think of it as 6 credit hours of hard science classes. Think of it as 2 biochems, essentially, and plan the rest of your semester accordingly. So that means if you have a pretty chill 12-hour semester, that's going to turn into an 18-hour semester, which we all know those are brutal. But what that means more importantly is if you keep all your extracurriculars on and you're still taking 16 hours, because why not? Now you just created an impossible 22-hour semester for yourself. And yeah, like I said there at the bottom, be careful about extracurriculars. I know people that didn't offload their extracurriculars. You should be planning that in the fall of your junior year. How am I going to offload a lot of these extracurriculars? Not everything, but you cannot be doing it all during your MCAT semester, because I know so many people that tried to do it all during their MCAT semester, and the MCAT didn't go well. And, whether it turned into a gap year or turned into something else, growth year or something else, then it wasn't their MCAT score is what held them out of med school. All right, this is another piece of advice that I give in my book that I think is very, very important. Rec letters. Okay, so even the really smart students would get to their junior year, students that did great in school, they have all the extracurriculars, they'd show up and they'd say, how did you get rec letters? How'd you get 4 or 5 rec letters? And I say, well, just go talk to go ask the professors that know you pretty well. And you did well in their class, things like that. And they always respond, I feel like I don't know any of my professors that well, right? I took this guy freshman year for biology, and I think he would write a good letter for me, but I haven't talked to him in 2.5 years. I hear that all the time. And so my recommendation for you guys, as you're taking classes, if you hit it off with a professor, don't just go to their class while you're in their class. After you finish their class, it's just like logging your volunteer hours, logging your shadowing hours. You have to make an effort to also log hours with your past professors. Because I know Dr. Fowler and I were actually talking about this the other day. He was like, you will not believe the number of nothing burger, just absolutely terrible letters of recommendation. And he was like, it's essentially useless. I can't do anything with this because all this person is saying is, yeah, they took my class. I don't remember anything about them, but they got an A. And you have to remember, most people applying to med school got A's in plenty of classes. So that doesn't make you distinguished at all. So spend time, go talk to your professors, especially after you finish taking their class.
Yeah, Kyle, the letter, you remember the example I gave you was one I saw a while back that said, a professor in biology writes, Mr. Jones says that he was in my biology 300 class, And while I don't remember him, he made an A in my class, so he must be a good student. And I suppose that means he'll do well in medical school. That is a nothing letter.
Yeah. And so you guys probably, I know that made me laugh when he first told me. That will probably make some of y'all laugh too, but that is the truth. So many people struggle with that. And so yeah, make time to go talk to your professors, talk about your life. Your professors are teachers. Most of them have their PhDs. They could be teaching about whatever they feel like, or they could be doing whatever they feel like doing. They decided to become teachers. And especially those freshman teachers, those professors decided to teach freshmen. They could have taught anything. They wanted to teach freshmen, or they wanted to teach sophomores because they like talking to y'all. So go back and just, talk with them about life, about what's going on with you, what's going on with them. And you will have 4 or 5 great recommendation letters, and recommendation letters are worth more than you probably think they are when it comes to medical school. And then the last thing is make good grades. This one should be obvious. But I will say that you shouldn't ask a professor that you made a C in their class. You can still be friends with them. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely, you can be friends with whoever you want. I would recommend against asking them for a rec letter, because what's going to happen is they will talk about how great you are and all of your extracurriculars and how you're so compassionate and amazing. But every recommendation letter, they'll essentially be asked to also evaluate your academic performance. And they will not, even if they want to, they will not be able to escape having to say, but they made a C in my class. And so be careful about that. That's kind of one of those pitfalls. All right, interviews. So briefly about interviews I can talk about this. I interviewed at 11 schools, and this is kind of what I found. And so the cool thing about med school interviews is most of them look pretty much the exact same. I wasn't really caught off guard by many interviews. This is kind of your general what it's going to look like. So one of the questions that I always get is, you guys will read on Student Doctor Network that they're watching your every move, seeing your body language, things like that, and they're deciding whether or not you're getting into medical school. I think that's true to an extent, but not nearly as much as people make it out to be. If you say something completely obscure and you're not on good behavior, then of course that's going to hurt you. But I would not be walking around feeling like you have to perform everything perfectly, because that's going to make you way too uptight to be, the relaxed person that I'm sure most of you are. And then here's kind of a awesome little tidbit I got that I kind of picked up about 2 or 3 interviews in. Pretty much every interview you go on and every interview you ever do for anything will ask you, why blank? So why this medical school? Why do you want to go to UT Southwestern? The good thing is that in the morning, they'll give you a delicious breakfast and they'll give you a presentation, everything that you need to know about their school and why you should pick their school. Now, if you think about it, they're telling you why you should pick their school. And so then all they're going to do is ask you why you should pick their school. And you're essentially regurgitating parts of the answer. That's not to say lie and tell them what they want to hear, but that's to say that take those things that really connect with you and turn them around and just give them right back to them. So if you hear a presentation from, I know whenever I went to A&M, they threw up statistics about how it's just incredible that there are so few doctors in Texas in some of these small counties. And small county medicine, my parents live in Fredericksburg, things like that. That is something that I'm really interested in. So when they said that, I was kind of every time they did those presentations in the morning, I was taking notes on all the stuff they said. That way I could study them for a second over breakfast, put it in my pocket. And then when I went to do my interview, when they asked why this school, I would say, well, I have always loved small town medicine. And you're, like I said, you're not lying or putting on a face, but it's something that really did connect with you, but it's a little, you're giving them a good answer. And then, you'll either have interviews before lunch or interviews after lunch. And it's 2 30-minute interviews most of the time. But I'm sure you guys can find all of that online. The lunch, especially, I know you guys are from all over the world, but in Texas, at least, every medical school is competing to see who serves the best lunch. And it's kind of a fun running joke among people that do their interviews in Texas. I thought it was a close tie between McGovern and Southwestern. McGovern did have some really good enchiladas. That's not the same reason that I was stuck between those two schools for picking a school, but it was kind of a fun thing that we all argued about who had the best lunch. But what you guys really want to hear about is how you prep for interviews. My best advice for interviews is you want to print off your application. So take your AAMC or your TMD SAS application, print it off, and for every single thing that you put on your application, write something that's not on the application that taught you. So I don't know, this certain leadership position you did where you talked about on your application, here's what I did. Off to the side of that, you want to make notes of, there was this really great experience I had where I had to deal with this challenge, where I had a conflict with this other person. Write all those out and study them. You don't want to write out pre-formed answers because you'll sound like a robot, but study situations that you went through that made you into the person you're going to be. Because you want to control the interview. You don't want the interviewer to control the interview. And what I mean by that is when they ask a question, you will already have an answer ready because you studied it ahead of time. You know a situation, because it's so hard to come up with a situation off the top of your head of a time you overcame conflict, right? And you know you're probably going to get that question at some point. So write out answers off to the side of your application and be ready to talk about each one of those individually. And so anything they ask, when they say, oh, so tell me about this leadership position or this volunteering position, you'll be able to lean in, like I said, and you'll be able to say, oh man, that was an incredible opportunity. We got to go do this thing. And then I remember one time I was actually doing this thing, and I learned this and this and this through this interaction that I had with this one person, and that's going to make me a better doctor because. And that's how you should be answering every single interview question. And the best way to do that is to have your answers basically locked and loaded, and then you're essentially shooting your answers at questions, not letting them shoot questions at you and trying to kind of frantically come up with an answer. And this is one thing I actually, in the book, I didn't have enough time to put it here, but in the book I actually go through my 11 interviews. I go through the questions I was asked most often and what the best ways, not what an answer for those are, but the best ways to prepare your answers for those. And I think I have like 15 or so, 20 questions in there, which should probably cover you for the vast majority of your interviews. And then the last thing, or one of the last things I want to talk about is a little touch of personal responsibility. I think this is so important. I almost didn't put it in, but I couldn't leave it out. Like we talked about at the beginning, 40% of people that apply to med school every year get in. It's a good thing that that's not statistics. Think about how stressed out you'd be if that was just statistics. But that's also tough news to say that it's on you, because it means if you don't get in, then it was in large part because you didn't do enough. There's no real other way to put it. And there will be tough parts for everybody, right? There will be curveballs. Things are going to happen that you prepared in every way you could to stop them from happening, and they're going to happen anyways. But that's going to happen for the rest of your life. And med schools want to see everybody went through something. That's not to say everybody went through the same kinds of things. Some people's things are way worse. But med schools look at that and they say, wow, that person overcame that so effectively. And that benefits your application way more than the person who's never had anything wrong with them ever. And so regardless of what happens to you, you are in control of a large part of your life. You are in control of what you do with that stuff. And I know this sounds like pretty cliche stuff, but you should look at everything you do and you should train your brain to say, okay, if I failed, it was because of me, right? It doesn't matter. I think it's incredible. I think the perfect example of this is Tom Brady. I mean, Tom Brady is one of the greatest to ever do it. And if you watch his interviews, his defense could give up 55 points in a game and they could lose. And Tom Brady could say, well, we scored 50, but we could have scored 60, right? I could have scored more points and we would have won. He's not blaming the defense. He's not blaming anything else. The reason I bring this up is because one trend that I started to notice while I was an undergrad is that there were some people that if they failed a quiz or a quiz was really hard and they didn't do well, and they said, man, I should have studied harder for that. Those are the same people that I noticed 3 years later, they got into medical school. And an overwhelming amount of the time, the people that said, oh man, yeah, I got to be in that class because I don't know, the teacher didn't like me, or I didn't like them. That class wasn't really for me. Teacher was just mean. Those are the people that didn't get into medical school. And so I don't say this lightly. I think this may be one of the most important things you can do, not just for medical school, but for the rest of your life, is be able to take a step back and just say, okay, I am going to train my brain that I'm going to find the personal responsibility aspect of this. Even if the average was a 50 and I got a 50, you have to sit there and say, I could have studied harder. Yeah, you can complain with your friends about everything, but you need to take a step back and say, I could have done more. And eventually you will train your brain to work that way all the time. And when it's on you, you become so scared to fail because you know you're going to have to deal with the consequences that you will find you'll be more successful. I can promise you that. Yeah, so a typical day in the life of a med student. I have a feeling that this is what some of you guys want to see real briefly before we finish up and go to another Q&A. So this is what my general schedule looks like. We at UT Southwestern do a block system. Once you finish your first semester, your second and third semesters are all organ blocks. So these are all endocrine lectures. So I'm only in one class at a time. It's pretty awesome. So I know many of y'all are taking 16 hours or in like 6 or 7 classes, 5 classes. I only take one class. Each class has usually 2 quizzes and a test, and that's your whole grade. And so I wake up in the morning. These are all lectures in the purple, and then the blue is stuff that I have to do. And so the purple is just, I have, people are like, oh, that's awesome. You only have 1 class. But yeah, I have 5 lectures for that 1 class. And this is, the cool thing is that once you guys get to medical school, it's life-changing. It's so awesome. You guys are learning medicine every single day. Today, I woke up and didn't know much about diabetes at all. And today was diabetes day. And I know so much about diabetes now. It's crazy. And so med school is so cool. It's awesome. You guys are going to love it. And then you guys can kind of see on Tuesday, I got to go to Parkland. We have every couple of weeks, we have to go interview a patient. So I got to go see a real live patient. And he was incredible. Got to talk to him, hear his story, and then write up a patient report on him. You can see on Tuesday, I had the unfortunate part where I had to meet with Dr. Fowler down there. But yeah, this is what my general schedule looks like. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer questions about what med school is like in general, things like that. And then to finish off, this goes back to the question, Ali, that you asked earlier, how to prepare for med school during college. So learn an efficient study strategy. This is so, so important. Just because your study strategy got you really good grades in undergrad does not mean it's good. If you had to study for 14 hours a day in undergrad to get those A's, it's just not going to work in med school. It's going to take up too much time because you will have more information to learn at a quicker pace in med school. So try and teach yourself to learn not just a study strategy that works, but an efficient study strategy. And in my book, I talk all about not just the study strategies I use, but the study strategies all of my friends use. That seem to be the most efficient ones and the ones that I've researched and used, because I like to vary my study strategy quite a bit. So these are ones that I've used and they are really efficient. And then take the hard classes. So when you're a senior, take the hard classes, and even if you don't crush them, that's okay. If you're a senior, that means you probably have already applied to med school or are applying to med school. And at that point, once they accept you, once they interview you, they're going to make sure you pass your classes, and that's pretty much it. And if you get a B in anatomy, but you took anatomy, that will prepare you for med school better than just not taking anatomy. So I cannot recommend enough. I took pathophys and I took anatomy at Baylor, and it made my life a lot easier when I got to Southwestern. And then if you're not taking a gap year, this kind of goes up contrary to the second one, but if you're not taking a gap year, you have to make your senior year your pseudo gap year. I think it's very true that some people are getting burned out towards their senior year. And if that's the case and there's no way around it, you might want to take a gap year. Even if your application is strong enough, I've recommended that to students before, and there's a student that just started med school who was in my class, but they took a gap year because they were just miserable. And they were like, thank you so much for giving me that advice, because they're refreshed, they're ready to roll. But make senior year your pseudo gap year if you're not taking a gap year. So what that meant for me is that even though I took a couple hard classes, I, in large part, took some fun classes, like those philosophy classes that I took. And I really wasn't overwhelmingly worried about my grades. I didn't stress about extracurriculars. I went out to restaurants and watched the baseball games with my friends. I went to every sporting event that I possibly could, even if it meant that some of my other stuff that I've been focused on for the last 3 years struggled a little bit. And that was the best advice I could have given myself, because it made my life, I was ready to roll. I felt refreshed. I felt like I had a gap year. And so that's my advice to those not taking gap years is you have to, even though we're all type A's, we still want to make the grade. If for nothing else but the pride factor, you have to let yourself relax during your senior year. You did it. All of you guys that have been praying and hoping that you'll get into medical school, if you get to that point and you're not taking a gap year, that means you did it. So let yourself celebrate. Take time off. Have a short retirement, if you will, before you jump back into it. Go to the baseball games, watch the movies, do the fun stuff. So in summary, your grades have to come first. Grades are the main thing. If you don't have the grades, everything else is for nothing. Clear your schedule during MCAT semester. Check the boxes, but like it says in the most important pre-med advice, do it the way you want it. And an interview should be fun. You should be excited to talk about the stuff you spent so much time doing. That's the easy part. The hard part was doing it all, but now you just get to talk about it and have fun talking about it the same way you talk to your friends about it. And then the last thing is that you can do it. It's just the little motivational touch. But like I said, if you deserve to go to medical school, you will go to medical school. That is kind of the ringing advice that I want you to leave this talk with, is that if you deserve to go to medical school, you will go to medical school. Okay. So yeah, we got another Q&A here. I'd be happy to stay as long as need be, and then I want to talk about it a little bit on the next slide after we finish the Q&A.
All right. Yeah, we got a good amount of questions. Yeah, let's just get into it. So we were talking earlier about letters of recommendation, and one of the questions we got was, when should you ask for a letter of recommendation? So right after the end of the semester or right before you apply?
Yeah, I would wait until you're a little closer to the application part, because number one, you might take another class with that person, and the other thing is that let's say freshman year, I jump right into it and I asked this professor because I did well in their class to write me a rec letter, and then you never know, something goes awry. You end up not being the applicant that you thought you were going to be, things like that. So you want to wait until closer to the application cycle. And that's why it's so important to keep going back. And I would literally, in undergrad, I would put it on my calendar. It'd pop into my head and say, I haven't talked to Dr. Abel, my biochem professor, in a while. And I know I'm going to be asking her for a rec letter in the coming months. I'm going to just swing by her office, sit down, and, talk to her about whatever, not about the class, maybe talk to her about stuff that I'm doing, complain about something else, something that we can both relate to, just have fun with them. And so, yeah, because when you ask for a rec letter, they're going to ask for your whole resume so they can get a better picture of you outside of just talking to them. And so you can't really give them much. If you ask them right after the class and you're a freshman, then they'll be like, come back and ask me in a couple of years, because they don't know enough about you to say, because they're sticking their neck out there and saying this person would be a good med school applicant. And they don't want to say that. And then you turn into a bad med school applicant over the next 2 years, because then they know their letters of recommendation in the future aren't going to mean quite as much.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I wouldn't ask immediately, but just make sure they're still in the loop so they don't forget who you are.
Yeah.
A couple of questions about interviews. So there's a lot of people asking, how would you answer certain types of questions? So I'm gonna just spitball a couple of them, and you say what's the best way for them to answer it. So the first one would be, what are you going to do if you don't get into medical school?
Yeah, this is awesome. So just to pitch it one more time, that's a question that I actually answer in the book, along with probably 20 or 25 other ones. I promise I'm answering in that book the questions that you're gonna see in med school interviews. But the way I talk about answering that one is, you have to show your passion for healthcare. So that question can be asked in two different ways, really. That question can be asked, what will you do if you don't get in on this cycle? In which case, the only answer is I'm going to reapply, because it is everything in my being wants to be a doctor. So I'm going to do whatever it takes. The other way that can be asked is, what would you do if you couldn't go to medical school? So med school's off the table in general. That's the one that I got more often than not. I did get the one that I just mentioned once, and I got the other one twice. I got this one twice. The way I answered that one is basically say, you want to find something that does all of the same things, right? You don't want to say, especially if you have something on your application, like tons of research. They'll be like, why don't you want to be a PhD? If you had a music major, they'll be like, why don't you want to go into music? Why do you want to be a doctor? And so I would hesitate to say, Oh, well, I would just be a musician, because then they're going to be like, okay, how bad does this person want it if they're that easily going to sit there and say they would just be a musician? So I'd be careful about that. I would find something that has all of the same things that medicine does, because there's nothing that's the same. Anybody that's a doctor, anybody that's in medical school will tell you there is nothing like being a doctor. But there are a lot of things that are similar to it. So I think when I answered that question, I said I would be seeking out a role that allows me to serve patients in a similar way. So I would get to use my love for the basic sciences, my desire to serve people, kind of the ability to be a leader, things like that, and seeing patients at their most vulnerable state and being a person that's there for them. I'd be looking at things like nursing. I'd be looking at things like being a PA, things that would allow me similar interactions with patients and the ability to use all of the same gifts that I believe I was given to go into medicine.
Let me respond to that a little bit, Kyle, if you don't mind. That was a great answer. The first and foremost, you said, well, if it doesn't happen in this cycle, I absolutely will be applying again. That's a very reasonable thing. I had one guy one time, I told you this story, Kyle, who said he was already late 20s and his grades weren't great. And he came to see me to help him get in med school. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. What are you going to do if you don't get in? He says, I'm going to apply again. I said, well, then let's say you don't get in that year. What are you going to do? I'm going to apply again. I said, well, then what about after that? I'm going to apply again. I said, okay, well, now you're 47 and you've been rejected 20 times. What are you going to do? He says, I'm going to apply again. I said, that is not reasonable. The important thing is to indicate a mission for healthcare. If you don't get into medical school, there are so many other ways to be involved in healthcare. If you are really interested in applied science and being involved in improving people's lives through improving their health, there are so many other ways. You can get a master's in public health. You can work with public health departments, just as one example. You could go to nursing school, but regardless, I think and I'll shut up with this, Kyle, regardless, you need to be able to state what your real mission is as far as your real interest in being involved in helping people improve their health, whether it's one patient at a time in an exam room or 1 million people in downtown Dallas, Texas, working for the Department of Public Health for blood pressure screening and chest pain centers. I mean, there are many ways to be involved. Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So as we continue on, like how do you answer these certain interview questions? The next one, why do you want to become a physician, or why are you interested in medicine? What would be the best way to answer that? I know that's like the most common one to get asked.
The killer. Okay. So the first thing I want to say about that is that it's the same question as your personal statement, but it can't be the same answer as your personal statement. They want to hear about what makes you outside of what they already got a chance to read your application. Anybody that's interviewing you has read your application, they've read your personal statement. If you start quoting from your personal statement, they're going to know, and they're going to get bored. They're going to tune out because you're just saying stuff they've already heard before. But why do you want to be a physician? That is in large part a question that's different for everybody. And so it's hard to give kind of a direct answer. But as Dr. Fowler just said, and as I kind of just said, it's being a physician is the culmination of using applied sciences to get patients at their most vulnerable. A time when, I mean, if you guys have ever been to the doctor, had a serious illness, there is nothing scarier. They say the technical term that we use when we're learning about a heart attack is one of the symptoms is that they have a sense of impending doom. And so if somebody's having a heart attack, imagine having a clinically sense of impending doom. It's a horrifying time. And there's, I was just with Dr. Fowler last night, and these people are sick. They're hating their lives. They don't want to be in the hospital. Nobody wants to be in the hospital, except for us. And so you get an opportunity to be with that person at their most vulnerable. And that is the greatest honor of being a physician. And until you experience it, you don't get to know what it's like. So studying the applied sciences because you enjoy them, but even more so because it gives you an opportunity to take somebody who's at their most vulnerable and help them become better, right? Fix them, help them get back to the life that they were living before some stupid illness tried to stop them. And so to an extent, that's what being a physician's about. It's hard to answer that question fully for each of you. I would hesitate to say that the story that they hear every single time is, when I was 12, I broke my leg and the doctors were really nice. And so that if used the right way, that can be good. But make sure you're clarifying that you don't want to be a doctor because a doctor was nice to you. Because then I would ask, okay, if somebody built your house, does that make you want to be an architect, right? That in and of itself doesn't do it. So if you're going to use an answer like that, which is what a lot of people do, then make sure you clarify that that is not the reason that you want to be a doctor. It might have been what got you interested in healthcare, but it is not the reason you want to be a doctor.
Kyle, let me also comment. All of you listening, and there's still 200 of you out there, you've got to be able to express what it is that is your interest and your passion, and you've got to be able to write about that on your personal statement. I mean, I've read where it says, I've wanted to be a doctor ever since my grandmother had a hangnail. And the total interest in medicine, their total exposure was the fact that somebody had a zit on their finger, and that is why they want to be a doctor. That is a poor expression, and you must have a much deeper thing. I mean, from our end on the admissions committee, if what got you interested in medicine is a hangnail on your grandmother, well, golly, you get into medicine and you find out that you were really not interested in it and you drop out, and we lose somebody in medical school who could have been a doctor for us. So please, you've got to be able to express carefully in both written statement, in your personal essay, as well as on a one-on-one basis with an interviewer, what is it that drives your passion? And I'll shut up with this, Kyle. This is a long road to get through, to get into medical school, get through it, get into a residency, get through it, and then go find a job. And so you've got to have a passion that will take you the whole way. Don't you think so, Kyle?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interestingly enough, Dr. Fowler, to speak to how important that is, I actually have in the drawer right next to me a printed copy of my personal statement. Because there are days when you are just like, I don't know how much I want this anymore, because I have been up studying for 14 hours a day for 7 days straight because I have a test, and then we also have a quiz and this and that. And you take a second, you read your personal statement, and you remind yourself, this is how personal your personal statement should be. Is that it's not just saying what you think the med schools want to hear. It's something that you should be able to go back and read and say, that's why I want to be a doctor.
All right. So the final one of these, like, how would you respond if this is given to you in an interview one, is an example of something that you don't like about medicine, or what would you want to change in medicine?
Yeah. So my personal one, whenever I got that question, I was shadowing an orthopedic surgeon, and there was a very distinct instance that I remember, and I didn't just remember it, duly noted. I wrote it down in my journal and then remembered it whenever I was making my application. Because this was actually when I was still a freshman. I was shadowing, and there was somebody who came in, and they had basically a ton of joint fluid, and they had a ton of joint pain. And so getting the fluid out, and then they were gonna inject them with a medication. And at the time, it was all over my head. I had no idea what it was. Still can't remember what it was, but he injected her with some medication, and he walked out the door, and he looked at me and he said, that medication, he's like trying to give me some science background. He said, that medication is not going to work because of this reason. This other one that I know is going to work in her specific instance, we have it over there. And like, it's going to work because of this and this and this. I had to stop him and be like, why did you just give her a drug that you know isn't going to work? And he gave me the answer that is the epitome of why being a doctor is kind of tough sometimes. And Dr. Fowler already knows what I'm going to say. Some of you probably do too. It's because insurance won't cover the second one until the first one is tried, right? And so that's a perfect instance of, like I said, being a doctor is not perfect. As a doctor, that should frustrate you. And so things like that. And then, another one that jumps out at you is in medicine today, you don't get to spend a ton of time with patients. Depending on what specialty you go into, it's tough to sit with a patient for 30, 40 minutes. And really give them the holistic care that as doctors we would like to give them. And so things like that are the kind of things that you can take a step back and be like, look, I know that this is kind of the crappy part about medicine, but I know that, and I still want to do it because the pros outweigh the cons. I understand the cons. I'm not just watching Grey's Anatomy and the glorified, medicine that is. I know the cons. I've been in the hospital. I've seen the stuff I don't like, and I still think I want to do it, or I still know I want to do it.
That was very infuriating to hear. My dad gets so many different types of medications because of the illnesses that he has. And there are multiple times in which the insurance wouldn't provide stuff like insulin, for example, and we had to pay out of pocket. So just doing stuff like that, it's a pain, but it's something that we have to live with.
Yeah.
Kyle, I want to thank you so much. Gosh, what a great talk. You've been going nearly 2 hours. Did you have any idea you had that much to say? This was just terrific. And Kyle, I want to tell you, I'm on the admissions committee and I voted on you. And I want to have to say that on behalf of the whole committee, you made us proud. So everybody put a thank you, Kyle, into the chat right now so Kyle can see the chat. And tell him how much we very much appreciate what you did tonight. Well, folks, we're coming to the end of another wonderful session. Look at that, Kyle. They just love you tonight.
They are bombarding. Thank you, Kyles.
I do have a bit of news that's off the beaten path, Kyle. Tomorrow at 2:20 in the afternoon Central Time, the Earth will be directly, the sun will be directly over the equator of the Earth, and it will be the autumnal equinox. So fall starts tomorrow at 2:20 Central Time. So y'all be sure and look up and see the sun exactly over the equator of the Earth at that time. If that's not far out, I don't know what is. Kyle, we deeply appreciate it. On behalf of the whole working group team, we sincerely just appreciate you folks continuing to come back and expressing your interest week after week. And the familiar faces that we've gotten to know, Ashley and Michael and all the rest, Zeal and Shirley and all the rest that keep coming back every week. So, Ali, I believe you're going to tell us where to find the exam, are you?
But before then, I feel like Kyle is going to tell us where you can find all you need to know about getting into medical school in his brand new book.
That's good pitch, Ali. I like it. Yep. But yeah, so there's just really briefly. So everything that's in the book, like I said, it's 106 pages, and it is everything I could think to include. It's all the stuff we talked about today, far more in depth. I only had a couple PowerPoint slides for each of these things, but tons of pages on that. And then I go into the exact things that I used to get a 519 on the MCAT, and how I studied and how I studied for each section, how I took each section, what my mentality was going through each section. And it was tried and true, like I said, not just from me, but from professional test takers, from students who scored well, as good or better than me. And then I have a general schedule for each of the 4 years of being a pre-med, as well as, like I said, all those interview questions you guys were asking me about, each one of those where I actually answer in the book as well. So it's going to be the stuff that you guys have questions about. I think I have like 20 interview questions on there, and then a long statement on how I would answer it. And then how to write a strong personal statement, how to navigate TMD, SAS, and AMCAS, and over 20 more chapters. And then this is not just my advice, like I've been saying. Med school admissions committee members have been looking at this stuff, and you can find it all at kylelangston.com. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me right there. And I'd be happy to talk with you guys about specific questions, things like that. And then Ali, I think the quiz is right there.
Yes, it is. So for you guys to get credit for today's session, just scan the QR code. It's going to be due at 6:59 p.m. next Tuesday. You'll have 2 attempts, and you got to score 70 in order to get the full credit. Make sure you save that certificate so you guys have a chance to see so you guys can actually track if you got the hours. Put in your journal if you need to. You guys should definitely have journals now after today's session. And that should be all for tonight. Thank you so much to Kyle for hosting an incredible session, and thank you to you guys for coming, as you always do.
So on behalf of the whole working group team, on behalf of soon-to-be Dr. Kyle Langston, we thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again next week for another exciting session